right, gang, we're going to get our panel started. So if you would like to be here for this panel, come have a seat. If you want to go talk store with your friends, get out. Okay. Mahalo for joining us for our final panel, Hawaii in a Time of Rising Authoritarianism. My name is Ilima, and I'm going to introduce our panelists in 1 second. This panel, you can't have La Hoi Hoi Ea and not talk about like whatever the elephant in the room is at the moment, or whatever the big issues are at the moment. And this is that panel. So I want to just introduce my fellow panelists first. Directly to my right is KharaJabola-Carolus, who is a movement strategist whose organizing for immigrant justice includes formally leading the Hawaii Coalition for Immigrant Rights, co-founding Roots Reborn on Maui, and authoring the first report to analyze the impacts of Lahaina fire on immigrant women. I know Kara, then I like to do my own introductions of you guys. Kara is someone who has moved my thinking as a Kanaka woman on feminism, feminist issues, and sex work. And most recently, I attended a tour of women's labor history that Kara somehow got into the Hawaii Plantation Village. And it was amazing, and it was awesome. And so she is just so smart and a militant fighter for the things that she believes in. And yeah, help me welcome her, Kara. And then to Kara's right is Davis Price, a licensed attorney and graduate of the William S. Richardson School of Law and Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge at UH Manoa. For over 15 years, he's advanced for, he's advocated for ＡINA Native Hawaiian rights through public policy. He's a policy guy, attorney, a policy guy. He's great at that. And grassroots organizing. Right now, he's Climate Justice Initiative Director for NDN Collective. And he also co-founded the ＡINA Aloha Economic Futures Initiative to promote climate justice in Hawaii. My introduction of Davis is a super passionate rock and roller behind the scenes, provided tons of support on the Mauna behind the scenes, never in front of a camera. He's a policy guy, he's super analytic, and he thinks in terms of systems and organization. And as of late, we have been having a lot of discussions around the upcoming lease fight, okay? So, and then my name is Ilima. I'm the Pelikikena of Hui Aloha ʻAINA o Honolulu. Oh yeah, hey, Hui Aloha ʻAINA, right on. And I also work at the ILWU Local 142. Prior to that, I was at HSTA. And prior to that, I was doing student programming at Native Hawaiian Student Services for 10 years. So, we are here to talk about this moment. Let's see here. Facing attacks on our rights in Hawaii as Hawaiians, as immigrants, is nothing new, but it sure has come into focus in really violent ways under the Trump administration. And it is important for us to think about what that means for our issues. And is it getting us to think about some of the struggles we're up against differently, and if so, how? It's also important to bring these issues together. We know that ICE is wreaking havoc in our communities as well. We might see more of the violence being wielded in neighborhoods in California, but the terror is happening here as well. And we need to bring these issues in with Hawaiian issues, with issues of militarism. So to start us off, I'm gonna ask Kara to talk first. Can you talk about what is happening right now with immigration in Hawaii? And can you also help us understand the function that Hawaii, that our land, right, our occupied lands are serving for this current attack on immigrant communities?
Aloha nui everyone. So to answer that question, I think really what's happening right now with deportations is that we as a community are being tested. We're being tested how far they can take this new amplification of repression by targeting first-right immigrants. So this is why you're seeing the first ramp up of militarization around immigrants and how far they can go in terms of, you know, bypassing civil liberties, attacking judges in the judiciary, etc., testing out on immigrants, while also solidifying this new ramped up patriotism and nationalism, which is a core salient feature of fascism, right? So that is first and foremost, I think, how we should look at deportation. And the second way we should look at deportation is also an attack on the working class. Because the very first immigration laws in the United States were not immigration laws. They were poor laws. They were laws that were meant to target those who were not seen as people capable of being productive. So they were very gendered and they were anti-poor. So they particularly, no matter how long you had been in the United States, if you were not considered productive or if you were considered to be taxing on resources, that is who was first targeted. So this is also part of a movement nationally to also racialize nationalism. And when the very first kind of modern immigration system, as we know it now, it arose in the aftermath of World War I to be anti-radical and against labor organizing. And so that is when you had deportations becoming punitive, becoming systematic, and being centralized with the federal government and not just left to the states. And the effect of that was to make the fear of deportation ever present in the lives of workers. And so what we're seeing now, like Ilima said, is not new. Authoritarianism has been constant and episodic in Hawaii because authoritarianism is inherent to patriarchy. It is also inherent to capitalism. So when there's any threat to capitalism or patriarchy, that is when you see the repressive functions of the state flare up. So when it's under stress is when you see the things that normally keep us in control and keep labor in control, like the ideological apparatus of the state. When that is not enough is when you see a ramp up of authoritarianism. And so, of course, the biggest example in Hawaii when we came under full-blown fascism was during martial law, and maybe we can talk about that later, but that's my 2 cents on what's happening now in historical perspective.
Can I ask you to back up a little bit on like what was the context for this ramp up on authoritarianism in the last, you know, in recent times and maybe the last decade or so as you've seen it? What is this a reaction to? Is it a reaction to something? Because you mentioned that when there's like rise in resistance is when the ideological, you said, is not enough. So like, has there been signs that there is a fight to be had, and is this a reaction to that?
Well, very simply, very simply put, when things start to suck economically and people start to see inequality, that's the one thing that we're supposed to be distracted against. And so the intensification of exploitation in itself created this condition where more and more people are seeing inequality, they're seeing that they can't get ahead, they're seeing that it's a structural force. So it's not just the strength of the movement either, but that's a part of it that it's reacting to. But also when you have extreme oppression having an impact on people's material conditions, and we see that here in Hawaii very intensely, right? I myself am a renter. There is no pathway that I see open to me to own a home. And that's a generation-wide issue and a multi-generational issue now. So that's just one telltale sign of what this speaks to, in my opinion.
Thank you. I'm gonna bump it over to you, Davis. one of the big issues that's coming up, and we had a whole panel on it last year at La Ho'iho'i, is the expiration of these military leases in 2029 in Hawaii. And we know that we are going to need to, it's going to be a big fight. And this at a time when the current occupying administration is pumping more money than ever into the military, is using bases to to detain immigrants, a concentration on the importance of militarism by the current administration. How do you see this moment and this fight?
Check. Is on? Aloha, everybody. Yeah, so we hope it's going to be a big fight, right? I think that's the concern. I think I'll just go through like the thought process and the questions I think that I ask myself and our colleagues as we kind of think about how to engage this process. And, first question is how do we organize? How do we leverage this moment to address the historical injustices that have occurred at the hands of the U.S. military and the United States more generally? And it just so happens that we're asking this question about how to resist and disrupt perhaps the status quo at a time of rising authoritarianism, with the Trump administration coming in and doing everything that they're doing with regards to increasing policing and using military force to execute deportations, for example. It creates kind of a whole new dynamic that we have to address and prepare for. And so I think some of the biggest concerns that I've seen is with the deportation activity that we've been seeing. One of the biggest concerns I see is the normalizing of like plainclothes officers going into communities and detaining people, and thinking about if we were in that, if we're going to be in a position where we have to exercise civil disobedience when it comes to increasing awareness, heightening consciousness around the military lease issue. What does that mean for Hawaii? Native Hawaiians, our community has gotten very good. Unfortunately, it's something that we have become experts at, is nonviolent direct action and exercising our First Amendment rights as well as our Native Hawaiian and traditional customary rights to make our point, essentially, and to resist the power of the state. And what does that look like if law enforcement shows up in plain clothes, ready to detain people? That's a concern. It's something that we've never had to address. At the same time, and that feels unprecedented. At the same time, some of this doesn't feel very unprecedented at all. I just saw last week that Senator Ted Cruz introduced a bill in Congress to try to exercise RICO, which has been historically used to take down organized crime syndicates, trying to use that to attack nonprofits who organize around citizen rights issues. So much of the work that we do, I work for a national nonprofit that's under consistent threat, that's under the threat of indictment. It's been under the threat of indictment and investigation for the last 5 years. More locally, when the Mauna popped off, when the occupation of the ala was at its height in 2019, then Governor Ige and his Attorney General threatened multiple nonprofit organizations with investigations, tried to subpoena records. That included Kahea, who was the small one, who ended up in court because they were the smallest ones. But it wasn't just nonprofits too, it was Hawaiian Airlines. They were alleging that Hawaiian Airlines was partaking in criminal activity because of the mileage program that was going on. Kamehameha Schools, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, were all hit with subpoenas. So this is, to what Kara mentioned, these are tools of the capitalist government. Authoritarianism is just what it looks like right now when we see it in a much more blatant way, but it's nothing new. And so I go back and forth between like this kind of anxiety around, oh, this is an unprecedented time, versus, we've been through this and we know what to do. And it's always grounded in nonviolent, direct action, being well organized and informed populace and citizenry, and that's what we gotta do. We gotta get to work and start educating people about the facts, about what history surrounds these military leases, and what military occupation in Hawaii really means, and challenging the narratives that the mainstream media and that most of society is just trained to believe that military is here for our benefit and that we can't survive without it. It's wrong. It's completely false. So we can get more into that later.
Thank you. I want to ask you do you think that the conditions at the federal level, what should we be aware of? Does anything change in terms of what's likely or possible in terms of the fight to not renew any of the leases? Or to not renew any one or multiple of the leases?
What's the opportunity?
No, what have the conditions changed? Should we be considering things a little bit differently? Should we be considering the fight ahead a little differently under this administration?
That's a good question. I actually, and I'll go back, right after the elections happened, I was speaking on a panel at the Ag conference back in November, and somebody asked, like, what do we do now? And my response then, I think is a response now, is like, you can't let the chaos of what's happening at the federal government detract from what you have to do on the ground. And so when opposition and like things that are, I think, that don't align with our viewpoints, very much like we have the chaos of the Trump administration in action, I think the game plan is to go hyper-local. I think that's what we need to do, is to get boots on the ground. Hyper-local meaning go back to grassroots organizing principles, and building awareness and identifying, like, educating folks and informing and having conversations around what is possible at the local level. And that way you're prepared for, you can best be prepared for what the federal authorities can bring, and hopefully can engage the folks at the state level to participate with us. But at the end of the day, power's in the people. It shouldn't matter what's happening at the federal level. It just makes things, the pathway, a little more clear or not clear in how we move forward. I think the threat of violence from the federal authorities should be something that is definitely considered, which to me, just the response to that is to go deep into nonviolent direct action discipline. We cannot let things escalate to a violent level. We shouldn't even, civil disobedience shouldn't be at the forefront right now. It should be, how do we inform our people, the public, about the truth. Our number one obstacle right now is narrative and generations of indoctrination that leads most folks in Hawaii to believe that the military is necessary to our survival. And that has to be challenged first and foremost. That narrative. That doesn't matter who's president. Biden, Obama, Trump, don't matter. We've got to challenge that all day, every day.
From a policy level, do you think that this administration is more likely to just be like, poof, it's ours? What are the mechanisms that are possible? Because right now we're like engaging the what do you call it, the EISs, right? We're kind of putting faith in the process itself and assuming that we can just sort of like intervene all along the way. Is there something entirely different that can happen?
Yeah, so actually in the news that just came out last week, that I think the second highest commanding officer in the United States Army visited Hawaii last week and met and basically forced the governor to meet. And And then a news story came out that his message to the governor was, we need to make these leases happen. And I think that's in direct response to the BLNR rejecting the EISs for Pohakuloa and the Oahu lands recently. And that's a testament to, again, the power of the voice of the people, both from community testimony to the voices on the BLNR that have been committed to representing the voice of Native Hawaiians and allies in that space. And so, reject the EIS, it slows down the process. Army is now concerned. They show up and they're trying to force the governor's hand. And what could happen is the federal government can make some kind of condemnation, which it has the full authority to do under United States law, and through executive orders or condemnation, and basically circumvent the entire process. That is by all means possible. That's always possible. And I think that threat is real. But that shouldn't, how it's being framed by the governor and even others in our own community is from a place of fear. Like, if we should try to avoid that as much as possible by playing nicely and negotiating with them. And I don't necessarily agree that that's the best strategy, or I feel like there's room for other voices that need to rise up right now and challenge that idea that we should be afraid of the president or Congress doing this, and we should hold the governor's feet to the fire to say, no, this shouldn't be fast tracked, this shouldn't be expedited, you need to follow the procedures, and and that's only going to happen with the exercise of community voice. And yeah, I don't know, does that answer? It's kind of, can elaborate a little bit more, but I don't want to take up too much time. Yeah.
That's good. Come back to that. Kara, you mentioned that we've seen really intense authoritarianism in Hawaii before. Can you paint a picture about that? And the reason why, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history too. The reason why we're going to bring history into this conversation is because we actually have been in really intense moments of, or decades even, of hardcore authoritarianism in Hawaii, and those that have been overcome also. But to get a sense of, it's terrifying, some of the stuff that we're seeing. But let's get a sense of how we have been here before. Can you paint a picture from, what you've learned about our history, about how we've been here before?
Well, the most powerful example is, of course, the declaration of martial law in 1941. So martial law has been declared in the United States 68 times. 29 of those times have been to suppress labor organizing. Not war, not invasion, not insurrection, not environmental catastrophes. The majority of the times have been to put down labor. And when martial law was declared in Hawaii, of course, right, Hawaii was inside the combat zone, World War II was happening, and the initial excuse was, of course, to round up enemy ethnicities, Japanese leaders, Italian, German leaders here, spies, and national security. But it quickly became obvious, and actually for the duration of martial law, the debate was around the fact that it was being used as a pretext to control labor organizing in Hawaii. And this wasn't a fringe idea. This was actually Governor Steinbeck, the civilian governor. He literally said that this has been coming for years. People have been trying to put Hawaii under military control. This was a carefully planned pretext to control the labor supply of Hawaii. And as martial law continued, even the Department of War got exacerbated with the Honolulu Chamber of Commerce and the Big Five, saying that you guys care less about winning the war and more about just controlling the economy and gaining corporate power and suppressing labor organizing. So it became very obvious. So why? So what martial law did, besides the suspension of habeas corpus, replacing civilian courts with military tribunals, all the things that we know, is that it also put labor under direct military control. So anything related to labor. So there was a freeze on hiring. You could not change jobs. there were a huge amount of higher paying jobs open, defense jobs, but you could not switch jobs. Absenteeism, so not showing up for work, right, or quitting, were criminalized. They were criminal offenses that were punished with jail time and exorbitant fines. If you were somehow let go or lost your job, you were placed in a new job within 72 hours. You had to agree to this. You know, the plantations lent out plantation workers to the Department of Defense or War Department, and they pocketed the difference. So it was a huge boom for the plantations in terms of amassing money from the war. So all of these things were really important in making that argument and became very obvious. So, you know, there was a de facto no strike policy, no weekends. Workers had to work 70 hours a week, 6 days a week. Even high schoolers and junior high students were required to work on plantations, and they had their own luna at this time. So 1 day a week. So this is one example of very extreme conditions that the workforce at that time and the unions at that time would have seen what we're in right now as absolutely luxurious and relatively free. In fact, when they got back civilian jurisdiction over labor was when they just went, you know, haywire and started organizing against martial law, right? So not to say that this moment is not alarming, it is not rising authoritarianism, but also just to appreciate what we still have and to utilize all of those tactics in our toolbox that we still have, which, you know, from that perspective would have been considered more lax. Yeah.
And I want to add to that, that at that time, you know, Kyle had spoken about the yellow peril, right? And Japanese were interned all throughout the United States. I think there were some exemptions made here because the plantations so badly needed their laborers, right? So they're like, oh, just kidding. That whole facade that the Japanese were a threat was kind of like puka through over here because the plantations were so desperate for their workers to not, you know, be interned. But there's always going to be that racialization, right? That race baiting. Oh, it's the Japanese. Who is it now? Mexican immigrants, right? The criminal south of the border immigrants that need to be detained in the name of national security, right? And so that is something to be aware of. And I want to pass this back to Davis. I'm going to give some thoughts on it first, but this is a moment where Kanaka, we really need to take seriously getting outside of our little Hawaiian bubbles. We really need to take seriously what it means that vulnerable, poor working immigrants are being detained on our lands and put into detention centers on military bases here in the name of national security. Because it is also going to be in the name of national security that they fight tooth and nail against us as we go for these leases, right? So that's one piece. And yeah, so Davis, I want to ask you a little bit, you're talking about organizing, but how are you thinking about this moment? Are you thinking about this moment as a Hawaiian outside of the Hawaiian world at all? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot. We haven't talked about this before, but do you see the need for a broader organizing strategy than we've typically engaged in our Hawaiian issues?
Absolutely. Check. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason is a lot of you just laid a lot of that out. But really, it's because of like the narratives that we're up against, which is national security. We heard that. We always hear that with regard in Hawaii. We hear it with regard to the military leases. We heard it when Red Hill. You know, for before the disaster happened, before the spill happened, when the documents and the knowledge of Red Hill became unclassified in the early 2000s, and the environmental community started ringing the alarm like this is a disaster waiting to happen because there's these massive tanks in the side of the mountain 100 feet above the aquifer is a disaster waiting to happen, and it kept getting brushed under the rug, like disregarded, like, it's been there for 40 years, whatever. But also, the narrative was, we need it, we need it, we need it from the military, national security. Fast forward, 2022, the spill happens, and we still heard that. In the early days, it was, well, you know, this is necessary for military strategy. But then as things kind of unfolded, and the impacts of that disaster were felt by military personnel, and our community organized to apply pressure, we learned that they don't really need it. It's outdated and, you know, yeah, not necessary. That same amount of fuel can now be carried by tankers in the ocean. So it's outdated technology. So it wasn't, that national security narrative wasn't really the truth. And so that's gonna be the case right now. We've heard now the largest Department of Defense budget ever proposed. Literally days, weeks after this new defense secretary went around and said that we need to cut spending. The way that this administration just lies to people is incredible. But literally, you know, they're saying we're gonna cut the budget, cut the budget, cut the budget. Hegseth came out here and said that he was gonna demand that all the branches cut their budget by 40% over the next 5 years. And then they came out with a $1 trillion budget proposal, the largest defense budget ever proposed. And at that time when Hegseth said that he was gonna propose, you know, he was proposing these budget cuts, he very clearly stated that those cuts wouldn't apply to Indo-PACOM, which is the Pacific region, because of national security, the threat of China. So there's not a pathway to reducing military presence in Hawaii. The pathway right now, the trajectory that we're on, is to increase it and to support this really imperialistic viewpoint of the Trump administration. And so, you know, we have to challenge these narratives. Back to your original question is, you know, we have to get to the truth and challenge the status quo. And so when we hear that these lands are necessary for the United States military to be strategically competent and strong, we have to challenge that. What is Pohakuloa really used for? What is that live fire training necessary for? We heard it for decades around Makua, and now that live fire training just stopped. We heard it for decades around Kaho'olawe, and then that after us, you know, the Hawaiian Renaissance and everything that the PKO folks did to heighten consciousness and awareness around protection of that island, the bombing was stopped. So we can't just accept the narrative that all of this military presence is necessary for national security, nor can we accept that it's necessary for our economic survival. I was just doing a little bit of research, and I'm hoping to do more as this issue develops around what the real economic impacts are, because we only hear of it as through a lens of like, these are beneficial impacts. $8.3 billion spent annually in Hawaii by the U.S. military, but what are the impacts to our housing market? 43,000 personnel in Hawaii sucking up our housing resources. 40% of those personnel live off base and compete with renters, compete with homeowners, with their subsidies. And you know, this is not to knock the military personnel, but it's a system and an institution that has to be questioned. They have impacts in our education system, which I'm learning more about. Like, this is what I mean. Like, I've been public policy advocate for 15 years. I barely know any of this. I learn new facts from people like Kyle on a weekly basis. So mahalo to you, Kyle. Mahalo to the academics that are researching this. We really need this data. We really need to get back, and this is where the organizing comes in. We've gotta empower these voices to get, and their knowledge, we've got to access that and unlock it for everybody to hear and learn about and share, so that we can move the needle with the 1.4 million residents of Hawaii. That's really our biggest challenge right now, is how do we raise awareness around what the truth is. Then we can talk about civil disobedience, shutting down roads, you know, and getting in the way of the status quo machine. But we've got to be armed with the right tools, and the tools right now is knowledge, and it's out there. It's out there. We just got to dig in and start to talk about it and share it.
Right on. I'm going to share a little bit more reflection on the past to think about, you know, how I'm thinking about this moment. But a couple decades before martial law, you know, martial law was like the peak when people started. That was the reaction. Yes, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and it was the perfect moment to take out the rising militant labor leaders in Hawaii. But authoritarianism was the way society was ordered in the decades prior to that. And so we can talk about how bad, you know, the authoritarian government is, but we also got to look at the conditions of the people and what creates the conditions for it to work and what creates the conditions for it to be meaningfully challenged. And so that's one of the ways that I sort of found a little bit of relief in what I am seeing happen everywhere around us right now, is that, okay, we've been here in Hawaii, and here's a little bit about some of the conditions of the people. The people were totally oppressed and repressed. Everything was controlled by the Big Five. We know this. This is basic Hawaiian history. The courts, the bar, transportation, all trade and commerce, education. Everything was controlled. And we hear that a lot, but I think what we don't maybe pick up on every time is that what that means is if you challenged it, you were out. You were retaliated against. The corporate class was so organized, they would retaliate against anybody who went against them. You would lose your license to be a practicing attorney, right? You would not be able to grow a small business that challenged theirs. You know, you would be put in jail. And the struggle of the people was very siloed. So we know this as Hawaiian history, or Hawaii labor history as well, right? The Japanese were on the Japanese plantations, Filipinos, Chinese, and if one rose up in their silo, the other would be sent to break their strike. And this created, I mean, imagine that now. Try and figure out what is the metaphor in your life for that now. Imagine the animosity and hatred that created across the plantation workers. You know, when other people are just ruining and totally undermining and being a traitor, you know, undermining your attempts to struggle with your people. So that was one of the conditions. And the ruling class stirred those divisions. They liked those divisions. So we should be thinking about, how does division among us, working class, immigrant background people, Native Hawaiians, where does division pop up? And when we see our fellow no power person as the problem, can we think about that critically and see who that has power is at play in this situation? And then there was the intense authoritarianism. There was a 1940 report that came out called the Egan Report. A man named Elwyn J. Egan was sent to the Hawaiian Islands to do an investigation on the status of labor and industry here. And in his report, he lists it all out. Just go Google the Egan Report and read it. It's super fascinating. But there's a part in there where he says, this is 1940 now, if there is a truer picture of fascism anywhere in the world than the Hawaiian Islands, then I do not know the definition of it. Okay? And so those conditions had to change. And they did change. And it was people who were studied in Marxism and people who were getting introduced to more militant concepts of unionism that came in and started organizing across. And I'm sure it wasn't easy to be like, look, that Japanese plantation worker is not your enemy. We all got to band together under, against the corporate class, the big five, right? What is our version of that today? To me, it's identity politics and culture wars. And it's totally being exploited by this administration in particular. The Democrats fucking love culture wars too. So I am no fan of the Democratic Party at all. They are just a identity obsessed version of the Republican Party. But then the Republicans will just shamelessly come out. I don't know if you all saw that horrible presidential campaign commercial that was running during the Super Bowl. Kamala Harris is for they, them. Trump is for you. Yeah? That's culture wars, that's identity politics, and it is incredibly at play in the political landscape, and it is incredibly shaping the organizing opportunities right now. Okay, there's a lot of people, a lot of working class people in Hawaii that buy into that stuff. So like they overcame this kind of me versus you thing in the past, we are right there once again. And it is a huge challenge. All that unity we felt on the Mauna was so beautiful. We were all together in one lahui. And then, oh my God, go look at all the social media accounts that all the working class Hawaiians follow right now, and we are not unified at all. Maybe under some Hawaiian issues, but that's not going to cut it to take on what we have to take on ahead of ourselves. I mean, in a little bit, or what we have to take on right now. And then the other part is the, organizing ourselves. So we have to get beyond that identity. Like we mentioned in the panel before us, the labor movement made a very liberal turn after statehood and became part of the development power apparatus, right? And didn't take on Hawaiian issues or sovereignty issues that whole time through. Other labor movements in the Pacific did, kept on a revolutionary anti-colonial trajectory. Hawaii did not. So then you have the Hawaiian movement takes off in the 70s. It's not super, it's kind of organically class-based, all the grassroots NACAs have always been at the head of the sovereignty movement, but it didn't instill that as one of its theoretical frameworks, class. It went off and did its thing. So how I see it is these things need to come together now. It's time. It's time. We, as anti-colonial as we are, we need to have a sharp class analysis in there. We need to know who is us and who is them. Yeah? Us is not just Hawaiians. Them is not just everybody else. Does that make sense? Why I'm even saying that? Yeah? And then if we have a class analysis, it has to be anti-colonial. We cannot do class without Hawaiian sovereignty. Right? And without land back, and without country back, and without deoccupation. So that's how I'm thinking about authoritarianism now, is sort of through the lessons of the past. And I think we'll just give some closing thoughts on the, what is the kahea right now? What is the kahea? That was my kahea. What is your guys' kahea? And then let's open it up for some Q&A and some discussion.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Ilima, I think when I say we've got to educate and inform, that really at the root of it, it's how do we get others aligned with what Native Hawaiians have been saying for forever about injustice and about demilitarization, and it's been a small group of activists that have been kind of ringing these bells, and like any movement, ringing these alarms. And like any movement, it starts, with the folks banging the drums, and then that has to grow, and that grows through consciousness expanding, awareness, education, and I think, you know, the more we can get people to acknowledge and understand that the military's presence here is not everything that we're told it is, that's building our circle. And that affects everybody. It's not just Native Hawaiians. You know, when we talk about, you know, there's a website called defense.economy.gov, which is a military site that highlights all of their economic benefits, if you will, in Hawaii. And so it claims to represent 8.3% of the GDP, which is the total economy in Hawaii. That's not huge. You know, and like what I'd like the kahea for us as organizers, as educators, and as people in Hawaii, as residents and concerned citizens, the kahea right now is really to just imagine what could be if not for the military's presence. You know, when we ask, or when we say, you know, challenge military's presence, when we say demilitarization, you know, why? Well, it comes down to governance of resources. Imagine if all that land was controlled locally. Imagine if all that land was controlled by a values that was governed with a value system that emphasizes aloha āINA. What would Pearl Harbor look like? And that's just to say that, you know, it's not impossible that 100 years from now, Pearl Harbor could look totally different. What could Schofield look like? You know, what could Makua look like? These are the questions that PKO, the George Helm, Uncle Walter guys was asking when they paddled out and occupied Kaho'olawe. They didn't have to accept what was happening. And just, you know, we're working on farmland up on North Shore right now. We can still hear the gunfire training and the practicing and the bombing happening at Schofield, at Paumoho. You can hear it. That's not something that just happened on Kaho'olawe, you know, 50 years ago. It's not just something that's happening on Puhakulua. It's happening here on Oahu. And so we have to really start to challenge ourselves to imagine a different future. And there's so many ideas out there, and there's communities that are actively working on this. If you go out to Waimanalo, they've been talking about what could happen with bellows for the last 50 years. If you go out to Makua, Auntie Lynette, I saw her walking around. Auntie Lynette, Uncle Sparky guys, Malama Makua, Auntie Terry, the forefront of DMZ, demilitarization. They've been saying this since the 70s. What could be different? You know, and we cheer them on, but the system has done horrible things to these people. And just that in itself should be the reason for us to stand up. You know, and it's an interesting dynamic right now because we're not facing the threat of trucks on a given day moving up a road that we can block. We're dealing with high-level negotiations and decision makers meeting. So how we disrupt and how we challenge that, it's gonna take a lot of creativity and a lot of solidarity. So I would just say, stay tuned. We have some ideas and some things that, you know, there's multiple folks working on multiple fronts that we're hoping will make the news. And it's really gonna start with each other, individuals challenging themselves to say, we don't, you know, challenging what you think you understand and what you've been taught. And that is that the military is here for our benefit. We can't just accept that anymore.
So I'm not a fan of privatized education, but anyway, this is an anecdote from my kids. They go to Nanakuli Elementary and Eva Elementary. And there's this thing called Market Day. It's a program for all third graders. They all have to participate in it. And at the end of each month, they start the school year with no money, and they have to earn money by being good students. And at the end of each month, they have a business, and they bring goods from home or that they make, and they have to sell them to accumulate more money. They are disciplined if they share their money. So this is what I mean when I say like ideological state apparatus and that we are in a war for our community's minds. We cannot just speak to those who think like us already. We need to win our people back. People are portraying Native Hawaiians and Filipinos in particular as the enemy because we are supposedly, pro-authoritarianism, pro-Trump, right? And we have to be out there and winning our people back. When I open the tour at Plantation Village, I open it with my favorite James Baldwin quote. It is that colonized people have to wage a constant battle for our self-esteem. If we don't have that self-esteem, and if we don't know, and if we don't feel pride of our culture and our value system, then we become patriotic to the wrong team. And not only do we have to win our people back, we have to win our men back. Because the most salient, damaging feature, I think personally, of authoritarianism is the way that it separates men and women and gender diverse people, and how it divides us and the working class against each other by implanting authoritarianism in our own homes. And so we need to fight that in a way that takes on not just this clinical approach, which is critical, not just direct services, but organizing people to see that they are being played by being obsessed with gender. And that's silly and that's ridiculous. And that the Trump administration is playing us all by making us disloyal to our own people. And so what I would say is also the last thing is that the thing that always humbles me the most is the sacrifices that I have learned that the generations in the plantation made for us. They didn't just get slapped on the wrist or fired. They were deported. They, by the thousands, were evicted and had to go to Sand Island or march across the Ko'olaus with their infants, with their children, and then be set up in camps indefinitely, right, and die of the flu and upper respiratory diseases just for trying to fight for the children. So what sacrifices are we willing to make? Are we willing to give our last breath for the thing that gave us our first breath, which is our nation and our community? So I call on us to remember the sacrifices and to set a higher standard for ourselves of what we might be asked to sacrifice during this time. Thank you all. That's my take.
That was a part. Yeah. Okay, I do also want to call out my brother and comrade, Corey Asano. Come over here, Corey. Bring your chair. I spent so much time of my life frustrated, not knowing what people mean by we gotta organize. Where do I start? And I want to talk about two versions. So just as like a takeaway, as a makana to the group, you can organize towards an event. You can organize towards a mobilization. I want to talk about Hui Aloha āINA right now. This is our answer to the question of building people power. What we mean by organizing is we are building organization. We are organizing ourselves. You don't go organize someone else. You ask, what? How am I organized? Am I organized in my union? Am I organized in my community? Who am I connected to? What are the ways that we come together and make decisions that are structured and formal, not just spontaneous once in a while as needed or reactionary? That is what we are doing in Hui Aloha āINA. We are building organization. There is structure, there is governance, there is ongoing political education, and there's internal ideological struggle that we engage in. So that is something I'm putting out there. How are you organizing yourself, right? How are we organizing ourselves? That is the question. And if we're not, then it's time to start thinking about getting organized. I want to hand it over to Corey, who is a Local 5, 20-something year Local 5 member, but is also now Local 5 staff, and I just want you know what I want you to talk about, but how are you bringing these things together? How are you bringing sovereignty education into predominantly working class immigrant union?
Wow. Totally not planned. Didn't get to prepare nothing. Ilima texted me on this side. Wow. I think for me is I'm a worker. right? So much times earlier, like somebody's ideas come from academia down, that is what I can do is relate to workers, and that's where the power is to me, is the people, right? And then so I try to just share stories, pretty much is what I do. Share stories of struggle and kind of help people understand that we're all in the same fight. It's all one fight, whether it be sovereignty or just a better life, right? We're all workers, that's people that are just trying to get by under this system. And the only way I found that we can beat this system is to organize workers to build power. I come from Auntie Lynette Cruz. I don't know if she's still here, but that's where I learned some of this stuff from. I came into the movement through Auntie, and then just so happened, I was a touring sound guy. I used to do this stuff all over the world and stuff, and I got married, I needed a job. And just so happened, the guys that was hiring was in Sheraton Waikiki, and they had a sound department. I didn't know it was Local 5. Over the years, then I started learning that, hey, I fight for justice on the workplace every day through my union, and on the weekends I stay cleaning ＡINA, trying to fight for the same kind of justice under the same system. And I started to understanding, hey, these two things kind of mesh, and then I met Ilima, and then she kind of helped me bring the whole thing together. But yeah, so that's just kind of like, we have to understand each other's stories and understand that it's all a shared struggle. And a second part to it, what I learned was, people sometimes hate the hotel union because we think we're pro-hotel industry, and that's a problem. But my thing is, how would you fix the problem? Are we going to hold signs of the hotel? No, we can organize the workers that work there and get them to build power and push back from the inside out. In 2024, we're able to shut down the Hilton Hawaiian Village, which is the largest water user, for over 40 days. And we messed with a whole bunch of their stuff. So through organizing power, we can really make stuff happen in real time now for our people. And power helps grow power. So the second part of it is, once you go through something like that, once the workers go through 40 days of struggle together, it's no longer housekeepers versus front desk versus the self-interest kind of disappears, and it becomes like one big family that just kind of, it's this kind of weird organic thing. But I think that's the kind of thing we as a community have to kind of get to. Let go some of the personal interests. Understand that the person over next to you is going through the same stuff, right? We all gotta afford to live here. We all need clean water. And yeah, and then the way that I found that is the best method is organizing people for power.
Yeah, Corey. Just to elaborate, Corey has also been doing sovereignty education, thanks to supportive leadership in Local 5, sovereignty education amongst the staff and sort of the leadership structure of members in Local 5. And now, next week, so I'm just gonna out you, next week is the Local 5 convention, and he's doing this Hawaiian education at the Local 5 convention this coming week. So there's like, I don't want organizing to be this like nebulous, how do I attain this? It's literally, this is where he works. He's doing it where he works, and that seems like impossible because our coworkers don't, like, they don't agree with us necessarily. That's exactly why it's the best place to organize. When we're always just talking to those who already agree with us, we don't build out stronger power, right? So,
can I also, I have an extra mic, huh?
Yeah, the sound guy.
Just one more thing I wanted to add, that, because, right, so one of the struggles I had at first was, how do I talk to these immigrant workers that moved to Hawaii thinking it's America for a better life, that all of this stuff is illegal, right? And then, so one of the things I found was, they move here and they make their lives here. So that's just one thing. Like, they always tell me, Corey, I'm from Philippines, but I love Hawaii. I'm gonna fight for Hawaii. That's one thing that was neat. The second thing I didn't think is, they come here and they intermarry. And then, so now their kids are of this place and sometimes have Kanaka blood in them. So now their kids have questions to the parents, and the parents come to me and say, can you teach me more of why there's a palace over there? And then so the education opens up even more. So yeah, that's something I kind of stumbled upon, but I just want to share that.
Yeah, so in this time of rising authoritarianism, this is the way. We got to reach beyond our comfort zones, beyond our little bubbles, talking to each other, and really make efforts to reach each other, our whole communities, our broader communities, and get ourselves organized. We started late, so we're going to keep it open for another 10 minutes. If there's Q&A, if there's any questions or comments, now's the time. And we have our runner, Mr. Tong, Waianae High School teacher, HSTA leader.
And I just wanted to remind everybody that you have until August 7th to turn in your comments against the PMRF on Hawaii. And also just know that everything you're talking about right now is happening live regarding Mauna Ala. So get educated about Mauna Ala, and as well as geothermal, because geothermal is the next really big one that it's going to be, they're looking for exploration, and they want to puka, everywhere. It's the community in Puna has been fighting for over, I don't know how many years already, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's toxic, and it's going to be put on the HHL Hawaiian homeland. So be, aware of all of that. And I just wanted to say, Davis Price, you have that she says to let him know that your childhood friend Malia from Kaimanu just popped on, and she said she wants to send you a big aloha to you and your ohana. Mahalo.
Something I'm really concerned with, especially like in this specific instance of authoritarianism, is the role that social media plays. I know that like with organizing, especially back in plantation days and stuff, a huge part of doing the organizing and controlling the narrative was like newspapers and control of the, like the narrative in the media and the way that people and the masses were educated. And with social media, you have like Mark Zuckerberg and stuff like owning land, in Hawaii, and owning the platforms that we're communicating with each other on and building our own personal ideologies on. And those algorithms and everything like serve to divide us. And how can we combat that? How can we combat like the algorithm-driven social media that seeks to divide us and like prioritizes making a hot take instead of like building something?
I don't know about algorithms, that's too much science for me, but I will say that the way that we use social media to shoot toxic darts at each other is keeping our movement nice and weak. Like we don't actually want to win. And I can say that I think that that's one of the most harmful things. I'll touch on a second one. That's one of the most harmful things. We're not engaging in principled struggle as a people. We're using social media to, basically like tear down, not just keep the people, it's not about the people that are being targeted on social media. It's about creating a culture of fear to get involved in organizing in the first place. So when I see people who are throwing toxic darts at other activists or other people in the movement on social media, you're done. You're done. I will never work with you, because that is creating a culture that makes fuck fear to speak out against the government. It's fear to get involved with us, anybody, right? And there are other ways of enacting accountability and things like that. So that's one piece. The other one is just like the phenomenon of these massive platforms in Hawaii that feed sensationalism, trash, racism, anti-immigrant stuff. And I don't know what the answer is to that, other than to combat it by we have to make a bigger, more inspirational voice to sort of re-galvanize the focus into the issues that we actually need. And I'm always racking my brain at when are we going to be ready to kind of do that and turn people's attention away from Micronesians fighting in Waikiki on one night or whatever, and then letting all the racist comments spill in to it's all time for us to stand up and fight for our āINA. And we've seen it before in our lifetime, in our recent lifetime. So unsatisfactory answer, but yeah. Anybody else want to? Yeah.
So I second everything that Ilima just said. I think on the flip side, on the bright side, I think that Palestine shows us that we can win on social media and turn the tide in terms of popular support in a way that I've never seen. And all this, all these assumptions about the next generation lacking critical thought, lacking critical analysis, poof, right? All of the traditional media and the multi-billion-dollar corporations and lobbying efforts involved in the Zionist project could not compete with the grassroots groundswell on social media and the way that our hearts were broken and continue to be broken. You cannot argue against that. When it comes to, of course, the manosphere and right-wing social media accounts, I think here locally it would be worthwhile to organize, especially the men who are leading those accounts, and not fully write them off yet. I always tell my partner to be more feminist online and try to win men over online. I also think that I'm no stranger to attacks in traditional media, and I think that we have the upper hand when it comes to combating narratives, in the Star Advertiser, in traditionally plantation, pro-corporate, authoritarian newspapers. I think that, we definitely do have some advantage now that we should lean into. So, yeah, just some of my thoughts on that. And if you do have a platform, I would say don't be afraid to use it. Really, I started out with nothing online, and I thought, I'm just going to be loud feminist and no one's going to show up. And people are hungry for that. They are hungry for the truth. And you really will see that people will become more vocal if you are more vocal. So your little circle can be more powerful than I think we give ourselves credit for. So, use your platform. Use your platform every chance that you can, and don't just write off social media.
Any other questions?
Mahalo, panelists. My question has to do with a lot of the conversation today has been about, just sort of, stretching out your circle and making sure that you're not just in your echo chamber and reaching out across divides. I was wondering, I feel like I've seen some organizations recently where, if you like, it seems very promising, and there might be some promising voices, but if you look at where the money's coming from, you kind of get a sense of, oh, maybe there's some developers behind this with hidden agendas. I guess as we're trying to make these connections across communities, how do we make sure that we're kind of not compromising ourselves? I don't know if I worded that well, but yeah, that's my question.
Okay, I'll try to offer a response. I think, for me, I often have this conversation with folks. My approach is very for myself, and I don't know if it'll be helpful, but I will say, I try to acknowledge or recognize when fear is driving a moment or an issue. So I often hear from people oh, I'm not going to work with this person, I'm not going to work with that person. And I know for myself, I've actually tried my best to understand what value anyone brings to any given effort, because I've actually heard that reference to solid people that maybe just had bad experiences with others. But then I also know that there's legitimate trust issues when that need to be acknowledged. And I would just say, man, you have to be pa'a with yourself and your understanding of an issue. You have to do your research. You have to do your own homework. And for myself, I try to do that, and yeah, if you find out that someone is working for somebody that has an alternative agenda, address it, question it, and then that decision is for you and for you to make. But ultimately, we have to take those risks, and we have to work with people that we trust. But there's a process for establishing principles and shared values, and I'll acknowledge, Ilima and people like Andre Perez and Camille Kalama, who have really broken down the academic best practices of community organizing that start with principles and values. And as people enter the circle, they all have to agree to operate under those same values and principles. And that's the first step. And if someone breaks that, then consequences follow, which means we just keep moving and you'll be left on the side. So be a good person and do your homework. And I think it's pretty simple for me. You can elaborate, Ilima.
I will add that also, if you break those agreements, that's one of the reasons why it's important to come into organization. You democratically build what the agreements are and what the process of accountability is. So in WELO KA HAE, we have processes of accountability because we're not going to throw away people for making mistakes either, right? But we do have these principles that everybody has to agree to strive toward in our organization. I also think that having a class analysis means understanding when the corporate class is trying to organize the people, and that is happening right now in Hawaii. The Hawaii Executive Council has, a project going on. There's the, what is it called? The something future, Hawaii's, what is it? Say it louder. Hawaii Soul, right? So you have the corporate executives organizing people at certain echelons of class to determine what is the future of Hawaii's soul. Do I believe that every single one of those executives is a cold-hearted devil? No. Maybe you do, that's fine. But do I believe that it is appropriate for the corporate class to organize the people to determine Hawaii's soul? Absolutely not. That is we're starting off wrong. That lacks the class analysis. They are not the problem solvers. And the system requires them to maintain an interest in their profits. That is the problem, right? So to your question, we do absolutely, that's why we have to develop a class consciousness, because we will be compromised. We are being compromised without such a thing in place. Any other questions? One last one. Yes. Auntie Terry.
Is this on? Yeah. Mahalo for your presentation. This has been a really wonderful day. And I thank you so much for sharing your manako. I just wanted to mention that when you have the class, I'm in the demilitarization movement, and when you have a class analysis, you begin to understand that some of the people that you can talk to are actually the soldiers themselves, not the generals. That's the class analysis part of it. The generals, they live in really nice places, yeah, and they have a very high standard of their type of living. But the people that you can reach and that will understand you based on the class analysis is the soldiers themselves. And so I think it's really good when we have meetings with them. Like they should be here, some of them should be here and have a tent so that you can meet them and have them talk about the things that they are facing and the struggles that they are, facing and doing something about. And that's what I wanted to say, is that class analysis goes very far and very deep, even if you're looking at the military, And so when we think about the military, my friend and I, he's over there, Kyle, we do a thing called detours. And what we do is we take people from the university or from the community, and we actually take them to military bases like Pearl Harbor. And it's really incredible how many people have never been to a military base or don't even know, what it's all about and how they operate here. And so by the time they leave our detour, they have learned a lot, not only about Oahu, but about the Big Island as well. Ho'ohakaloa is an example, yeah, where they have, fire, what do you call it, military, stuff going on. And then also you look at the whole of the Pacific Ocean, yeah. Tahiti was bombed by France. It was an atomic explosion by France, right? There's a lot of history of this kind of, this kind of wrongdoing to people of the Pacific, people who are islanders, people who live in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. So we have a lot of comrades or people that we can talk to as well, not only in Hawaii, but across the islands, and even in people like in Puerto Rico, other places like that have gone through the same thing. Okinawa, Guam. These are places where people have gone through the same thing that we can talk to. Okay, mahalo. That's all I wanted to say.
Mahalo, Terry. All right. Mahalo for coming to this final panel of La Ho'ihoi Ea. Don't be scared. Run into the fight, but not without a group of organized comrades with you. So, mahalo.